They thought money could buy them power, but they picked the wrong girl to humiliate. Before I tell you what happened, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. You won't believe how her father struck back. Her name was Emily, the daughter of a war veteran who carried scars no one could see. She lived a quiet life in a small town, going to school, helping her dad fix old trucks in their yard, and dreaming of a future far away from the arrogance of the rich boys who ruled the city streets. Her father, Jack, a man of few words and hard hands, had once survived battles overseas. Now his only war was to protect his daughter from a world that tried to break her spirit. It started one Friday night, when the sons of powerful businessmen cornered Emily outside a diner. They laughed, mocked her clothes, and shoved her books to the ground. One of them poured soda over her hair, the sticky liquid dripping as they called her names. Emily didn't fight back, she only picked up her things, her eyes burning with silent tears. What they didn't know was that someone was watching from across the street. Jack had been waiting in his truck, ready to take his daughter home. He saw everything, every shove, every cruel word, every smirk. That night, Emily came home and tried to hide it, but Jack noticed the way her hands trembled. He didn't speak. He simply placed his old combat knife on the table, looked at his daughter, and said quietly, "No one touches my family," and walks away smiling. Jack didn't rush. He'd learned long ago that anger without patience was just wasted energy. Instead, he started watching them, the rich boys who thought the town belonged to their father's money. He knew their routines, their hangouts, even which streets they used when driving home drunk from parties. He spent his nights sharpening old tools in the shed, his hands steady like back in his service days, and every strike of the whetstone echoed with the memory of Emily's tears. A week later, the boys tried again. This time they cornered her after school, laughing as one of them grabbed her wrist. But Jack was already there, stepping out from behind the shadows of the oak trees by the fence. His boots crunched on gravel, and the laughter died. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He only said, "Touch her again, and you'll learn what a real fight feels like." They smirked, thinking he was just an old man. That was their first mistake. That night, one of their shiny sports cars was found overturned in the ditch, all 4 tires slashed clean through. Another morning, their favorite party spot by the lake was burned to the ground, nothing left but blackened wood and the smell of smoke. No one saw who did it, but the boys whispered Jack's name. Fear began to creep into their confidence, yet they still couldn't resist one last act of cruelty. They left a note in Emily's locker, full of insults and threats, thinking it would break her. But when Jack read it, his hands didn't tremble. He folded the paper, slid it into his jacket, and said only 4 words, "This ends tonight." Jack didn't go straight after them that night. He wanted them restless, paranoid, waiting for something they couldn't predict. Days stretched into a week, and every corner of town seemed to whisper about the veteran with the hard eyes and the broken past. The rich boys put on their usual act at school, loud laughter, expensive clothes, but behind their smirks was fear. They avoided dark alleys, drove faster down back roads, jumped at every sound in the night. Emily noticed it too. She asked her father quietly at breakfast, "Are you doing something to them?" Jack just sipped his coffee, his silence heavier than words. Meanwhile, his plan grew patient and sharp, like the traps he once built in the forest during training. He left signs only they would understand, a boot print in the mud outside one boy's house, a spent shell casing placed neatly on the hood of another's car, a carved message in an oak tree by the lake, "I see you." Sleep became a stranger to them. At parties, they'd glance over their shoulders. On the way home, they'd race each other just to escape the shadows. But no matter how fast they drove or how loud they laughed, the thought of Jack never left. One evening, Emily came home trembling, clutching a phone. "They texted me again," she whispered, showing her father the message. "You'll regret this." Jack read it calmly, pocketed the phone, and stood. His chair scraped across the wooden floor, the sound sharp as a knife. "Good," he said. "They've chosen the place and the time for me." Jack waited until the night was thick with silence before he moved. The boys had grown careless again, their fear dulled by time and arrogance, but Jack had patience in his veins, patience born from years of waiting in foxholes with nothing but shadows for company. He chose the weakest link first, Connor, the one who always laughed the loudest to cover his nerves. Jack watched him stumble out of a party, drunk, fumbling with his car keys. He didn't strike immediately. Instead, he let Connor drive, following him in the darkness, headlights off, a predator unseen. Miles down the empty road, Connor's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced down, the glow of the screen reflecting his pale face. It was just 2 words, "Turn around." His hands shook, his breathing quickened, but there was no one behind him, or so he thought. By the time he pulled over, heart hammering, Jack was already there, a silhouette stepping from the tree-line, calm and steady. Connor stumbled back, muttering excuses, promises, anything to break the weight of Jack's stare. But Jack didn't yell. He didn't strike. He leaned close enough for Connor to feel his breath and whispered, "You'll carry this night for the rest of your life. Now go tell your friends." And with that, Jack vanished back into the dark, leaving Connor trembling, his legs too weak to stand. By dawn, word spread among the group. They knew now, Jack wasn't playing. He was hunting. And one by one, their time was coming. Jack didn't stop with Connor. The next to feel his shadow was Dylan, the ringleader, the one who thought money and his father's lawyers made him untouchable. Jack studied him for days, memorizing his patterns, his arrogance, the way he strutted through the small town as if he owned it. Dylan loved to jog alone at night along the river trail, earbuds blasting, blind to the world. Jack waited there one evening, watching him run, letting the darkness swallow his figure until only his footsteps remained. When Dylan finally noticed the absence of sound, the river too still, the crickets gone silent, he pulled his earbuds free. That's when he saw it. A pair of dog tags hanging from a branch at eye level, swaying softly in the night air. His laughter died in his throat. He knew exactly whose tags those were. Jack never stepped into the light, never needed to. A whisper carried on the wind was enough, "This is for her." Dylan sprinted back toward town, heart pounding, but every corner he turned, every empty street he crossed, felt like Jack was right behind him, unseen but inevitable. And while Dylan tried to convince his friends it was just paranoia, Jack was already moving on to the next one, a soldier waging his own war, silent and relentless, making sure each boy felt the weight of fear before judgment finally came. Dylan's bravado started to crumble. He avoided the river trail, stopped driving his expensive car, even skipped nights out with the others. But fear had already spread through the whole group. They whispered in bars about the ghost veteran, about how Jack always seemed one step ahead, how he knew where they lived, when they slept, what scared them most. One by one, they made mistakes. The third boy, Tyler, thought he was safe at a crowded party. Music blasted, lights flashed, but when he stepped into the bathroom, the mirror was fogged with steam that hadn't come from the sink. Scrawled across the glass with a soldier's precision, "I never forget." Tyler bolted, screaming, drunk kids laughing until they realized he wasn't joking. By then, Jack was already gone. The veterans in town began to notice too, old soldiers who nodded quietly when they saw Jack's silhouette at the edge of the streetlights. They didn't stop him. They understood. This wasn't revenge anymore, it was justice. And as each spoiled son of money and privilege fell deeper into paranoia, Jack's plan tightened around them like a noose, until the night would come when there was no escape, only a final reckoning between a father's oath and the cruelty of those who thought they were untouchable. Jack waited until the stormy night when all four of them gathered at their usual hangout, a glass-walled cabin on the hill that overlooked the small town like a throne. The spoiled boys thought they were safe there, hidden behind wealth and influence, but the wind howled through the valley, carrying the sound of boots crunching against wet gravel. One by one the lights in the cabin flickered, then died, plunging them into darkness lit only by lightning. A voice broke the silence, calm and sharp as steel. "You thought my daughter was weak. You thought money would protect you. Tonight, you'll learn what a soldier never forgets." Panic exploded inside, bottles breaking, chairs toppling, until the glass door creaked open and Jack stepped through, rain dripping off his shoulders, eyes burning with the fire of a father's rage. Dylan stammered, trying to bargain, his silver watch glinting under the flash of lightning, but Jack's gaze never wavered. He wasn't there for words. He was there to make them feel every ounce of fear, shame, and helplessness they had inflicted, until the world they had built on arrogance crumbled to dust around them, and the name of Jack, the veteran, the father, was the only thing they remembered in their final moments of power. Jack moved further into the cabin, his boots leaving wet prints on the polished floor. The spoiled boys scrambled back, tripping over each other, their bravado dissolving like smoke. "Stay away, old man," one shouted, waving a broken bottle with trembling hands, but the glass looked pathetic compared to the steady weight of the crowbar Jack carried. Lightning flashed again, throwing his scarred face into sharp relief, every line carved from years of discipline, every scar a reminder of what real survival looked like. He grabbed Dylan by the collar and slammed him against the wall, the air knocked from his lungs. "You laughed at her tears. Do you hear her laughing now?" Jack's voice cut like a blade. Another boy lunged forward, trying to look brave, but Jack twisted his wrist, sending the bottle shattering to the floor. Panic filled the room. These sons of money had never faced real fear, never faced consequences. Jack didn't have to kill them. He didn't have to leave their blood on the floor. He only had to strip away their armor of wealth and show them what they truly were, weak, cowardly boys who mistook cruelty for strength. When he finally stepped out into the storm again, leaving them broken, bruised, and gasping in the dark, he knew one thing for certain: they would never forget the night the veteran came for them, and they would never dare touch his daughter again. Rain beat against the tin roof as Jack walked away from the cabin, every step echoing like judgment. Behind him, the boys whimpered, their expensive clothes torn, their faces pale and bruised. The storm masked their cries, carrying them into the night as if to wash them clean. Jack paused at the tree line, gripping the crowbar tighter, the weight of it grounding him. He thought of his daughter, her trembling voice when she told him what they had done, her eyes filled with shame she didn't deserve. Rage had brought him here, but it was love that carried him through the door and gave him the strength to face them without hesitation. By the time he reached his porch, dawn had begun to break, painting the sky in shades of gold and gray. His daughter stood there waiting, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes wide when she saw him. He didn't need to say a word, she knew by the way he carried himself that justice had been done. She rushed into his arms, and he held her as the world grew quiet again. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt peace, knowing that no matter how cruel the world could be, she would never face it alone. Jack sat on the porch with his daughter wrapped in his arms, the storm easing into silence, leaving only the smell of wet pine and earth in the air. His hands still trembled, not from fear but from the weight of what he had done. The faces of those spoiled boys lingering like ghosts in the back of his mind. His daughter looked up at him, her lips parting to speak, but he hushed her gently, pressing his rough palm against her hair. "It's over," he whispered, his voice steady though his heart thundered. "They won't touch you again." The cabin's old boards creaked in the soft wind, and for the first time in months, there was no dread between them, only quiet, fragile safety. Jack stared out at the tree lean, the shadows shifting with the first rays of sunlight, and he knew he had crossed a line he could never step back from. But he also knew this: no one would ever dare to harm his family again, not while he still drew breath. Jack sat long into the morning, the first sun burning away the mist over the valley, his daughter asleep against his shoulder, breathing softly like a child again. The silence was heavy but not empty, it was the silence of an ending, and of a beginning. His rifle leaned against the porch rail, cleaned but still smelling of smoke, and beyond the tree line lay the scattered remains of the night's violence. Jack's eyes never left the horizon, because he knew the world would not forgive him, that word would spread in town, and sooner or later someone would come asking questions. But deep inside he didn't care. He had already chosen his truth, a father protecting his blood. The spoiled sons of wealth had believed their power made them untouchable, but now the town would whisper a different story, of the veteran who walked into the storm and came out with his daughter safe, his enemies buried under their own cruelty. And as Jack sat there with the morning light painting gold across the forest, he felt no regret, only a quiet vow that if the world tried again, he would be ready. Jack finally laid his daughter down on her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her face before pulling the blanket over her. For a moment he just stood there, listening to her breathing, realizing how close he had come to losing her. His fists clenched as images of the night flashed back, spoiled boys with cruel laughter, firelight glinting off their bottles, the sound of his rifle cracking through the dark. Downstairs the old floorboards creaked under his boots as he poured himself a glass of water, his reflection in the window staring back like a stranger, eyes hollow, jaw set, a man who had crossed a line he could never return from. Yet beneath that weight there was something else, a grim sense of justice. Those boys had believed money would shield them, but Jack had shown them the truth, that steel and wool were stronger than wealth. Outside, the wind carried faint voices from town, word already spreading, and he knew by nightfall everyone would talk about the veteran who had taken vengeance into his own hands. Jack set the glass down, tightened his belt, and stepped out onto the porch once more. The forest stood silent, but not peaceful, like it too remembered. He lit a cigarette, drew in the smoke, and whispered to the dawn, "Let them come." Jack knew the quiet wouldn't last. By noon, Two deputies rode up the dirt road, their horses stirring dust as they slowed near his porch. One of them, a younger man with a stiff hat brim, looked nervous, while the older deputy met Jack's eyes with a steady calm. They didn't reach for irons, didn't even dismount at first, just sat there, measuring him, waiting for him to speak. Jack took a drag from his cigarette, let the smoke curl out, and finally said, "I won't run." That seemed to settle the tension. The deputies dismounted, boots crunching gravel, and walked closer, careful like men approaching a cornered wolf. "Jack," the older one said, "you know what folks are saying. Those boys had names, families. The town wants blood." Jack didn't flinch. He tapped ash from his smoke and nodded toward the upstairs window. "My girl's alive because of what I did. They'd have left her broken in that clearing." "What would you have done?" The older deputy's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Behind them, the tree line swayed with the weight of silence, as though even the forest waited to hear what judgment would fall. Jack stood firm, his hands loose at his sides but his eyes unyielding. While the deputies exchanged glances, the younger one finally blurted, "The mayor wants you brought in. Folks are shouting for a hanging." Jack let the words settle, then flicked the cigarette butt into the dirt. "I won't be strung up for saving my own blood," he said low, steady, almost like a growl. The older deputy shifted his stance, torn between duty and what he knew to be right. He'd served in the war, same as Jack, and there was a recognition in his eyes, two men who'd seen the same darkness. Before either deputy could speak again, the door creaked, and Sarah stepped onto the porch, her face pale but her spine straight. "Tell them," she said, her voice trembling but strong, "tell them what those boys did to me." Her words hit the clearing like a hammer, cutting through the hush. The younger deputy swallowed hard, his bravado wilting as he looked away. The older one bowed his head, a long silence hanging before he finally muttered, "Sometimes justice ain't written in no book." He turned toward his horse, and after a pause, the younger followed. Jack watched them ride off slow, not toward town but back down the valley road, leaving him and Sarah in the stillness. The sun was sinking low, washing the sky in red, and for the first time in days, Jack's chest eased, though he knew the battle wasn't over, only postponed. Jack stayed quiet for a long while, staring at the orange glow bleeding across the horizon, the smell of pine and dust heavy in the air. Sarah sat on the porch steps, hugging her knees, her face drawn but her jaw set in a way he'd never seen before. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was alive, charged with everything that had happened and everything still to come. Finally Jack spoke, his voice rough, "They won't stop. Rich boys don't like being humiliated. Their families own the town." Sarah looked up at him, eyes glistening. "So what do we do?" Jack's gaze drifted toward the barn, then the valley road, where dust was still settling from the deputies' horses. "We wait," he said. "We prepare. And when they come again, we don't give them a second chance." Sarah's lips trembled, but she nodded. Inside, the old clock ticked, marking time too slowly for the storm they both felt coming. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Jack knew the night would be long. Jack rose slowly from the porch, the boards creaking under his weight. He lit a lantern and carried it to the barn, the yellow glow spilling across the weathered wood. Sarah followed, quiet, as though afraid her voice might break the spell holding him together. Inside the barn, rifles leaned against a beam, wrapped in old oilcloth, a reminder of the man Jack used to be before the war, before the quiet life he tried to build. He unwrapped one, checked the chamber, the metallic click echoing too loud in the night. Sarah flinched but didn't turn away. "They'll come for me, won't they?" she whispered. Jack tightened his jaw, slid the rifle shut, and met her eyes. "Not while I'm breathing." The lantern's flame flickered, shadows stretching tall across the barn walls, and in that moment, Sarah realized her father wasn't just a broken old veteran. He was a storm waiting to break, and those spoiled boys had just called the thunder. Jack set the lantern on the workbench, its flame dancing as the night grew colder. He pulled on the old leather strap of his rifle, the weight settling on his shoulder like an old friend he hadn't wanted to see again. Sarah stood in the doorway, her silhouette trembling in the lantern light, torn between fear and relief. Outside, the wind carried the distant echo of laughter, the arrogant, careless sound of boys who thought money made them untouchable. Jack's jaw tightened. Every scar on his hands, every sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, every memory of fallen brothers, all of it boiled to the surface. He turned to Sarah, voice low, steady, dangerous. "They wanted a fight," he said, almost to himself, "and they found the wrong man." Sarah's lips parted as if to speak, but the words died in her throat. She watched as her father stepped past her into the night, the barn door creaking shut behind him, and in the silence that followed. She knew the hills would soon carry a sound they hadn't heard in years, the sharp, merciless thunder of Jack's justice. The night swallowed him as Jack moved down the dirt road, each step slow, deliberate, measured. The trees loomed over him, branches swaying in the wind like watchful sentries. His grip on the rifle tightened when he saw the flicker of headlights near the clearing, the spoiled sons of wealth gathered there, leaning against their expensive cars, bottles in hand, their laughter cutting through the stillness of the countryside. Jack stopped just beyond the tree line, letting the darkness cloak him. Memories of battlefields surged, ambushes in deserts, skirmishes in ruined villages. He had always been the one to walk away, and tonight would be no different. He steadied his breath, eyes narrowing on the boys who had dared to lay hands on his daughter, and with the calm precision of a man who had lived through hell, he raised the rifle, his voice echoing low and cold across the clearing, "Playtime's over." The laughter stopped, and silence fell heavy, the kind that warned every one of them that the night had just turned deadly. Jack stepped out of the shadows, his boots crunching the gravel with the steady rhythm of a soldier who knew no fear. The boys froze, their smirks fading into pale shock as the sight of the rifle gleamed under the moonlight. Jack's gaze swept over them, pampered faces that had never tasted blood, never known the weight of consequence. "You thought my daughter was easy prey," he said, voice low and cutting, "but you forgot one thing: she's mine, and I protect what's mine." One of them stammered, trying to speak, but Jack's finger rested firm against the trigger. He didn't fire, not yet. Instead, he let silence choke them, the kind of silence that made cowards confess. They dropped their bottles, one by one, their arrogance collapsing under the cold stare of a man who had stared death in the eyes and won. Jack lowered the rifle just enough to make them breathe again. "Run," he ordered, and when they scrambled into their cars and tore off into the night, he finally let out the breath he'd been holding. Turning back toward home, he knew his daughter was safe, and he knew one thing for certain: the sons of privilege would never forget the night they crossed a veteran's line.